Hola Spanish learners! Welcome to another episode of Spanish Academy TV. Are you ready to take your Spanish skills out of this world? Today we are talking about a useful and essential topic for beginner Spanish learners. Join me for a lesson on stem changing verbs in Spanish, where I'll show you what they are, when to apply stem changes, and how many types there are. This lesson will also be full of conjugations and a list of stem changing verbs in Spanish for you to use whenever you need. But before we begin, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on any of the best Spanish content available online, and following these simple steps is the way to make sure. Like, subscribe, and notification bell. It's that easy. Let's get started with our must-know lesson on stem changing verbs in Spanish. First, let's define what stem-changing verbs in Spanish are. Stem-changing verbs are irregular verbs that have a slight change in the root when conjugated. I know what you're thinking, and you're probably feeling jumpy because irregular verbs have a reputation of being hard. But it's not true. Irregular verbs tend to be unpredictable, but you only need to understand their behavior to master them like a pro. In Spanish, every verb in infinitivo, infinitive, is formed by the root of the verb or stem and one of three endings: ar, ir. Let's take a look at an example of this using the regular verb comer, to eat. The stem is com, and the ending is er. When you conjugate a regular verb like this, all you have to do is take the stem, in this case com, and follow the regular pattern of conjugations for verbs ending in er. In the present tense, comer is conjugated the following way: yo como, tú comes, él, ella come, nosotros comemos, ustedes comen, ellos, ellas comen. Notice that the stem doesn't change in any of these conjugations. Now that we've covered this must-know difference, let's move on to those stem-changing verbs in Spanish. Like the name says, stem-changing verbs require you to change the stem of an irregular verb. But before we get to conjugating, let me cover a few basic points and direct you to our blog post that can refresh these concepts. Stem-changing verbs only change their stem when conjugated in present tense, preterite, and present progressive. Stem-changing verbs also don't necessarily change their stem in all three tenses. Some might change in the present, and others change only in preterite. Let's look at an example with the verb pensar, to think. In the present tense, you say yo pienso, I think, while in preterite, you say yo pensé, I thought. Notice how the stem changes in present tense to piens, while it stays the same in preterite, pens. This is exactly why stem-changing verbs are part of a wide collection of irregular verbs. They behave in a rebellious way and don't like following any established rules. To master these capricious verbs and their conjugations, you'll initially need to think about when to change the stem. But you'll see as we move forward in your Spanish learning process, the conjugation of stem-changing verbs will come to you naturally. You won't need to overthink it at all. Before we move on, do you know of the wonderful perks that we at Homeschool Spanish Academy have for you? We love sharing the best with you and can't think of a better way to motivate you to speak to a native speaker than with a free trial class. Join us today for free, no credit card needed, and start talking to one of our certified native Spanish-speaking teachers from Guatemala. Our teachers can't wait to improve your Spanish abilities with tailored lessons and flexible schedules. Go to www.spanish.academy/free-class to sign up now, or just click here. Let's continue with our lesson on stem-changing verbs by talking about the different types of verbs that fall into this category. There are 5 ways that a stem may change in stem-changing verbs in Spanish. Be aware, I'm going to say these letters in Spanish, so don't get confused with their English letter names. From A to E. From E to Y. From O to We. From I to Y. From U to We. Let's see how each one of these works. When it comes to changing from E to I, this applies to irregular verbs ending in ir. You have to take the E in the last syllable of the stem and change it to I. Let's take the verb pedir, to ask, in present tense as an example. The conjugation for pedir goes: yo pido. Tú pides. Él, ella pide. Nosotros pedimos. Ustedes piden. Ellos, ellas piden. Notice how the stem changes in all the forms except in the nosotros plural conjugation? This is actually common with stem-changing verbs in Spanish. The fact that they change their stem most of the time doesn't mean it has to change all of the time. Let's do another example for you to visualize this better. Let's use the irregular verb in present tense repetir, to repeat. The conjugation goes: yo repito. Tú repites. Él, ella repite. Nosotros repetimos. Ustedes repiten. Ellos, ellas repiten. As you can see, the same thing happens here. The present stem changes do not apply to nosotros, making this actually more common than you'd think. Other common E to I stem-changing verbs in Spanish are conseguir, to obtain, decir, to say, pedir, to ask, elegir, to choose, servir, to serve, medir, to measure, despedir, to say goodbye, corregir, to correct. Moving on to the second type of stem change, let's take a look at changing the stem from E to Y. This is the most common of changes, as it affects verbs with the 3 different infinitive endings, which are ar, and ir. This case requires you to change the E in the last syllable of the stem to ie. Let's examine the verb empezar, to begin, in present tense as an example. Yo empiezo. Tú empiezas. Él, ella empieza. Nosotros empezamos. Ustedes empiezan. Ellos, ellas empiezan. Let's take a look at another example, this time with the verb tener, to have. Yo tengo. Tú tienes. Él, ella tiene. Nosotros tenemos. Ustedes tienen. Ellos, ellas tienen. This verb is also an irregular yo form verb, and for that reason, the stem change doesn't apply using this pronoun. Another example of this rule is the verb venir, to come, and the conjugation yo vengo. Other common e to ye stem changing verbs in Spanish are cerrar, to close, defender, to defend, mentir, to lie, sentir, to feel, entender, to understand, calentar, to warm, negar, to deny, perder, to lose. The change from o to we is also quite common and affects verbs with the 3 infinitive endings. These verbs require you to change the o in the last syllable of the stem to we when conjugated. Let's use the verb mover, to move, as an example. Yo muevo. Tú mueves. Él, ella mueve. Nosotros movemos. Ustedes mueven. Ellos, ellas mueven. Once again, the stem change doesn't apply with the nosotros conjugation. Remember, I told you this is quite common. It certainly makes it easier to remember, don't you think? Other common o to we stem changing verbs in Spanish are costar, to cost, contar, to count, dormir, to sleep, probar, to prove, recordar, to remember, resolver, to resolve, mostrar, to show, volar, to fly. This stem change is actually quite rare and only applies to 2 stem changing verbs. The verb adquirir, to acquire, and the verb inquirir, to inquire. You have to add an e after the e in the last syllable of the stem. Using adquirir as an example, the conjugation is yo adquiero. Tú adquieres. Él, ella adquiere. Nosotros adquirimos. Ustedes adquieren. Ellos, ellas adquieren. Last but not least, the stem change from u to we only applies to one of the many stem changing verbs in Spanish. The verb jugar, to play, is one of my favorites and will be really easy for you to remember. This change requires you to add an e after the u in the last syllable of the stem. Let's conjugate it and put it to practice. Yo juego. Tú juegas. Él, ella juega. Nosotros jugamos. Ustedes juegan. Ellos, ellas juegan. I hope this must-know lesson about stem-changing verbs in Spanish leaves you feeling confident and ready to tackle irregular verbs. I encourage you to do the conjugation with as many stem-changing verbs as you can. You can start by memorizing them and step it up by repeating this conjugation exercise. Before you know it, identifying what stem change to use will come easily to you. If you feel ready to start using stem changing verbs in Spanish today, you can put them into practice when you download our free ebook, Weird and Wacky Spanish Stories for Beginners. This magazine-style ebook with pictures and English to Spanish parallel text is perfect for kids and adults. It'll allow you to improve your fluency through reading, and it's full of useful new vocabulary in Spanish. All 6 of the wacky and fun stories are guaranteed to keep you entertained as you get better at Spanish. Thank you for joining me on this great episode of Spanish Academy TV. See you next time. Adios, amigos. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and click that notification bell to never miss the best Spanish content on the web.